Imagine the California coastline in late autumn. The Pacific is calm, too calm. San Diego's harbor is still intact, no craters, no flames, no warning. Then the hospitals begin to fill. It starts with fever, then coughing, then blood. Doctors are confused. The symptoms don't match influenza. They don't match anything in their textbooks. Within days, entire neighborhoods fall silent. The war is already over in Europe. Germany has surrendered. Victory banners still hang in American streets. And yet, this is how the Second World War ends for the United States, not with celebration, but with quarantine lines and mass graves. Newspapers are censored, radio broadcasts turn vague, the word plague is never spoken aloud, but everyone feels it, in their lungs, in their fear. Far out at sea, a submarine slips beneath the waves. Its mission logs are sealed, its crew never celebrated peace. This was not a nuclear nightmare. This was worse. A war ended with disease, a continent poisoned not by bombs, but by intention. And buried deep in classified archives is the proof that this nightmare was not fiction, it was planned. For this nightmare to feel real, it must be real, at least in its foundations, and in this case, it is. By 1944, Japan was losing the war decisively. Its navy was shattered, its air power drained, its cities increasingly vulnerable to American bombers. Yet inside Japan's military establishment, desperation did not lead to surrender. It led to escalation, quiet, secret, and terrifyingly methodical. The Imperial Japanese Army had already crossed a line no other major power had crossed so openly: biological warfare. At the center of this effort was Unit 731, officially disguised as a public health and water purification unit. In reality, it was a sprawling human experimentation complex in occupied Manchuria. Its commander, General Shiro Ishii, was not a fringe extremist. He was a respected medical officer with direct access to Japan's highest military leadership.
Unit 731 did not theorize about biological weapons. They tested them. Plague-infected fleas were bred by the millions. Cholera, anthrax, typhoid, cultured, weaponized, and released on Chinese cities. Entire villages vanished from the historical record, not conquered, not bombed, simply erased by disease. This is not speculation. Chinese medical reports, Japanese military documents, post-war testimonies, all confirm it. By late 1944, Ishii and his colleagues were no longer asking if biological weapons worked. They were asking how far they could be delivered. That question found its answer in steel. The I-400 class submarines, the largest submarines ever built at the time, were engineering marvels. Each could travel halfway around the world without refueling. More importantly, each carried aircraft, folded wing bombers stored in watertight hangars capable of being launched from the open ocean. Their intended purpose was audacious: strike the American mainland. Initially, the target was the Panama Canal. Destroy it, and the U.S. Navy would be split between two oceans. That plan faltered. Time ran out. Resources vanished. American defenses hardened. But the submarines remained. The aircraft remained. And the pathogens already existed. In early 1945, a new proposal inside Japan's naval command structure. Its name was poetic, almost peaceful: Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night. The plan was chilling in its simplicity. Submarines would surface off the coast of Southern California. Aircraft would launch under cover of darkness. Instead of bombs, they would carry ceramic containers filled with plague-infected fleas, developed and tested by Unit 731. The target was not a military base, it was San Diego. A dense population, a major naval hub, favorable climate, prevailing winds that could carry infection inland. The goal was not destruction, it was panic. Overload the medical system, force mass quarantines, cripple morale. The operation was scheduled, on paper, for September 1945. This detail matters because it means the plan survived Hiroshima. It survived Nagasaki. It survived Japan's internal debates over surrender. Only one thing stopped it: time. Japan surrendered in August 1945, weeks before the planned launch. The submarines were ordered to stand down. The pilots never boarded their aircraft. The fleas never left their containers. But never is a fragile word. In the chaotic final weeks of the war, communications were delayed, orders were fragmented, units operated on outdated instructions. Some commanders considered fighting on independently. And buried inside naval intelligence reports is a quieter truth. American officials did not know this plan existed until after the war. Not during, not in time. History did not avoid catastrophe because it was impossible. It avoided it because the clock ran out. And that clock, for a brief moment, ticked dangerously close to zero. The question now becomes unavoidable. What if it hadn't?
To understand how close this came to reality, we have to leave the laboratories and enter the margins of command, where fear, exhaustion, and fragmented authority shaped decisions. By mid-1945, Japan's military was no longer a unified machine. It was a collection of silos. The Imperial Army, the Imperial Navy, each guarded its own secrets, each planned its own endgame. Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night lived in that shadow space. The Navy supported it quietly. The Army's biological warfare faction supported it enthusiastically. The civilian government barely understood it, and Emperor Hirohito was never fully briefed on its operational details. This ambiguity mattered, because Japan did not surrender cleanly. After Hiroshima, many senior officers argued the bomb was exaggerated. After Nagasaki, they argued it was a fluke. Even after the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, hardliners pushed for one final blow, something so shocking it would force the United States to negotiate rather than dictate terms. Biological warfare fit that logic perfectly. It required no air superiority, no fleet engagement, no return journey. The I-400 submarines, I-400, I-401, and I-402 were already operational. Their crews were trained. Their aircraft, the Aichi M6A Seiran, had completed test launches. These were not prototypes. They were mission-ready weapons. Even the pilots were selected. Young naval aviators trained for one-way missions. They were not told the full nature of their payloads, but they understood they would not return. Japan had already normalized sacrifice as strategy. Inside Unit 731, plague cultures were prepared for transport. Fleas were chosen specifically because they required no precision targeting. They would disperse themselves, bite indiscriminately, spread exponentially. This was not terror for terror's sake. It was epidemiology weaponized. And then comes the most dangerous detail of all. The operation was not canceled, it was postponed. Japanese naval records show that as late as August 1945, the plan still existed in draft form. The submarines were reassigned only after surrender orders were confirmed, not announced, confirmed. There was a window, measured in days, where independent commanders could have acted. This is where the pivot character enters the story. Captain Ryoichi Tada, a naval staff officer involved in unconventional warfare planning, later admitted under interrogation that biological operations against the U.S. mainland were considered militarily justified. He was not a fanatic. He was not Ishii. He was an administrator who believed Japan's only leverage left was fear.
On the American side, the failure was quieter, but just as real. U.S. Navy intelligence tracked the I-400 submarines as technological curiosities. They were seen as threats to the Panama Canal, not as plague carriers. Biological warfare was considered implausible, even unthinkable from a modern state. That assumption was deadly. American planners believed the Pacific was won, that the danger phase was over. Coastal defenses were relaxed. Civil defense preparations focused on sabotage, not disease. There were no plague response drills in California, no stockpiled antibiotics, no quarantine infrastructure, no public awareness. The system was blind because it did not expect cruelty at that scale. And this is the final anchor that locks this story into reality. After the war, the United States granted immunity to Unit 731 scientists in exchange for their data, not because it was trivial, but because it was valuable. They studied it, classified it, absorbed it, which means they understood, too late, what had nearly been done. Operation Cherry Blossoms was not science fiction. It was shelved history. A plan halted by surrender, not by morality. A catastrophe avoided by timing, not by defense. All it required to become real was one failure of communication, one delayed order, one commander who decided the war was not over yet. That is where the timeline tightens. That is where the screen darkens, because now we approach the exact moment history breaks.
This is the moment history fails. August 14th, 1945. Tokyo is burning, but not from bombs, from uncertainty. The surrender broadcast has been drafted, but not yet aired. Emperor Hirohito's voice is recorded in secret. Couriers move through the city, carrying lacquered discs that contain the end of the war. Some will arrive, some will not. Inside naval headquarters, the chain of command fractures. Orders are issued, revised, delayed. Communication lines are bomb-damaged. Cipher teams work through the night. In this confusion, one signal never reaches the Pacific Submarine Command in full. It is not a refusal. It is not rebellion. It is silence. A message arrives aboard I-401. Stand by, await confirmation. Confirmation never comes. For the submarine's commanding officer, this is not unusual. Wartime operations often operate under radio silence. Initiative has been encouraged. The crew has trained for months for a mission that was never officially canceled, only postponed. The operational folder remains on board, stamped, authorized, unsigned by surrender. This is the switch. At dawn, the submarine turns east. The I-401 is not alone. One sister boat has already been ordered to stand down. Another has mechanical issues and lags behind. History does not need all of them. It only needs one. Below deck, sealed containers are secured. Ceramic casings packed with straw and movement. The fleas inside are alive, hungry, infectious. Each carries Yersinia pestis, cultivated for maximum virulence. The pilots are briefed. They are told the target. They are told the timing. They are not told the word, plague. They don't ask. By the time the surrender broadcast finally reaches the fleet, the submarine is beyond recall. Radio silence is doctrine. Breaking it risks detection. The commanding officer makes a decision that in real history never had to be made. Proceed. The ocean stretches endlessly. The journey is long, but the I-400 class was built for this exact purpose. Weeks pass. The war officially ends. Celebrations erupt across the world. On this vessel, there is no celebration.
only preparation. In the final days of August, weather reports are studied carefully. Wind direction matters more than enemy radar. The mission requires a coastal breeze blowing inland. Southern California provides it almost year-round. The coast of San Diego appears on the horizon just before midnight. No alarms, no interception, no resistance. The hangar doors open. The aircraft are assembled on deck under red filtered lights. Engines cough, then settle into a low, steady hum. Each plane carries no explosives, no incendiaries, just fragile containers designed to shatter at altitude. This is not an attack meant to be seen. It is meant to be breathed. As the first aircraft lifts into the darkness, the timeline completes its turn. And from this point forward, there is no going back. The next hours will not be remembered for explosions. They will be remembered for symptoms.
The aircraft fly low, lower than doctrine recommends. The pilots hug the ocean's surface, avoiding radar that no longer expects an enemy. The war is over, after all, or so the coast believes. San Diego sleeps. Naval station, residential blocks, trolley lines, open windows catching the late summer air. There are no blackouts, no sirens, no searchlights cutting the sky. The planes climb only at the last moment. At 5,000 feet, the ceramic containers are released. They do not explode. They crack. Porcelain shatters, straw scatters, fleas scatter faster. The night wind carries them inland, invisible and silent. They settle on rooftops, on clotheslines, on open markets preparing for morning, on rats moving through alleys and storm drains, the perfect vectors. The aircraft turn back toward the sea. They do not attempt to land. Fuel is dumped. Engines are pushed to failure. The pilots disappear into the Pacific. By sunrise, there is nothing to see. No wreckage, no fires, no casualties. The first day passes unnoticed. Then the fevers begin. At first, doctors assume influenza. It is August, flu season is unlikely, but soldiers are returning home, crowded transports, crowded cities. It makes sense. Then the lymph nodes swell. Then the coughing turns wet, bloody. By the third day, the emergency rooms are overwhelmed. Patients deteriorate in hours. Antibiotics are administered blindly. Some work, most don't. The bacterial load is too high, the strain too aggressive. Doctors begin using a word they haven't said since medical school: plague. The local health department alerts Washington. The message is cautious, uncertain. No one wants to cause panic over a misdiagnosis, but samples are rushed east under guard. Within 48 hours, the Centers for Disease Control confirms it. Yersinia pestis, pneumonic, highly contagious, airborne. The nightmare is real. The response is immediate and inadequate. San Diego is sealed off. Highways are closed. Military checkpoints appear overnight. Trains stop running. Ships are ordered to remain offshore. The Navy base goes into full lockdown, trapping thousands of sailors inside a growing hot zone. But the fleas have already done their work. Some carriers traveled north, some south. Some boarded buses, some rode trains before the closures, some simply walked. Los Angeles reports its first cases days later. The president is briefed in private. The language is careful, non-attributable. No confirmed enemy action, no public statement of war. The war was supposed to be over. Intelligence agencies scramble. Submarine activity logs are re-examined. A single contact, weeks old, suddenly matters. A report dismissed as a false echo becomes a death sentence. When the truth emerges, when analysts connect the plague strain to Manchurian samples recovered after the war, the realization is crushing. This was planned. This was delivered. This was preventable. And now it is unstoppable. The screen pulls back. Maps appear. Red zones bloom outward from Southern California like ink in water. Quarantine lines fail. Hospitals collapse under the weight of patience and fear. The military mobilizes, not for invasion, but for containment. Entire cities are placed under martial law. Civil liberties vanish overnight. The weapon has already done what it was designed to do. It has broken the world without firing a single shot. And this is only the beginning. Because war does not end when peace is declared. It ends when consequences stop spreading. They haven't.
The response begins with uniforms. Soldiers in gas masks, medical personnel in improvised protective gear, National Guard units sealing neighborhoods with barbed wire and rifles held low, not to fight an enemy, but to hold a line against the invisible. Southern California becomes a battlefield without explosions. San Diego is divided into zones: red, amber, black. Black zones are written off entirely. Hospitals collapse first. Doctors fall ill treating patients they cannot save. Nurses quit or die. Supplies vanish. Antibiotics are rationed, then exhausted. Temporary field hospitals rise in stadiums and warehouses, only to be overwhelmed within days. The Navy faces an unprecedented dilemma. Thousands of sailors are trapped on base. Warships offshore cannot dock without risking contamination. Commanders debate evacuation versus isolation. In the end, isolation wins. Entire crews are sealed aboard their vessels. Some never leave. The pivot character now steps fully into focus. Commander Thomas Hale, U.S. Navy Medical Corps, epidemiologist, 38 years old, recently transferred from the Pacific Theater. He had studied Japanese disease outbreaks in China, but was never briefed on biological warfare. No one was. Hale is assigned to the San Diego Response Unit. His task is not to cure the plague, it is to slow it, to draw containment lines that will inevitably condemn people on the wrong side. Each decision costs lives. He recommends the destruction of entire neighborhoods, controlled burns to eliminate flea populations. The order is approved within hours. Homes are torched with personal belongings still inside. Some residents refuse to leave. They die behind fire breaks meant to save others. This is modern warfare stripped of heroism. On the streets, panic metastasizes faster than the disease. Looting, riots, shootings at checkpoints. Rumors of poisoned water supplies spread. Vigilante groups form, attacking anyone who coughs. The federal government locks down information. Newspapers are seized. Radio stations broadcast generic health advisories. The enemy is never named. Privately, retaliation is discussed. Japan is already defeated, occupied, disarmed, but the data recovered from Unit 731 now reads like a confession. Names, methods, quantities, the scale of preparation is undeniable. Some officials argue for public disclosure. Others argue silence is the only way to prevent nationwide hysteria. The military chooses silence. Behind closed doors, darker conversations take place.
Biological retaliation is considered, not against Japan, but as a deterrent for the future. If this happened once, it could happen again. The moral line, already crossed by the enemy, now looks thin. Meanwhile, the disease spreads eastward. Cases appear in Phoenix, then Denver. Air travel is suspended nationwide, but it's too late. Interstate trucking continues under emergency exemptions, carrying goods and fleas across the country. Commander Hale's maps grow uglier by the day. The red zones expand. The mortality rate stabilizes around 40% in untreated areas, lower where antibiotics are available, higher where panic prevents treatment. The United States is winning a war it never trained for and losing people by the tens of thousands. This is no longer an incident. It is a campaign. And the tactics are failing, because plague does not respect borders, and fear does not obey orders. The question now is not how to stop it, but what the country is willing to become to survive it. That answer is coming.
By the fourth week, the language changes. Officials stop saying outbreak. They start saying theater. The United States is divided into operational zones, each treated like a front line. Military planners, trained for invasion scenarios, now draft containment doctrines. Cities are evaluated not by strategic value, but by sacrifice potential. Some will be saved, some will be sealed. Commander Hale is moved east to coordinate federal response. He travels by armored train, windows sealed, guards masked. Every stop feels like entering a foreign country. In Washington, the atmosphere is suffocating. Congress meets behind closed doors. Emergency powers are extended indefinitely. Habeas corpus is suspended in multiple states. The legal framework of democracy bends under biological pressure. And still, the numbers climb. The military deploys flamethrower units, not against enemy troops, but against rat populations. Sewer systems are flooded with chemicals. Entire agricultural regions are quarantined, triggering food shortages that ripple nationwide. This is where the dominoes fall hardest. California's ports are closed, Pacific trade collapses, factories shut down, unemployment skyrockets, refugees move inland, spreading panic even where infection hasn't reached. Public trust erodes. Conspiracy theories explode. Some blame returning soldiers, others blame immigrants. Anti-Asian violence surges as the truth leaks in fragments. Neighborhoods arm themselves. Martial law becomes permanent in several metropolitan areas. Internationally, the shock is seismic. The Soviet Union watches closely. Europe, still recovering from war, seals its borders to American travelers. Allied confidence in U.S. stability fractures. The world's new superpower suddenly looks fragile. Behind the scenes, the most consequential decision of the war is made. The United States quietly accelerates its biological defense and offense programs. What began as a response becomes an arms race. Laboratories expand. Research once considered unthinkable becomes classified necessity. The moral high ground, already scorched, disappears entirely. Commander Hale is invited into these discussions. He refuses. He has seen what this weapon does, not in reports, not in simulations, but in wards full of children gasping for air, in nurses collapsing mid-shift, in cities turned into cordoned ghosts. His refusal ends his career. He is reassigned, silenced, his reports buried under higher classifications. In the official history, he becomes a footnote. In this timeline, he survives, but at the cost of relevance. By winter, the outbreak finally slows. Cold weather disrupts flea populations. Quarantine lines hold. The death toll stabilizes in the hundreds of thousands. The country is not destroyed, but it is scarred beyond recognition.
The enemy submarine is never found. Its fate becomes irrelevant. The damage it inflicted is permanent. The war is officially declared over for a second time. There are no parades, no victory speeches, just exhaustion, and a question that no one dares ask publicly. If this happened once, what happens next time? The camera pulls back further now, beyond battle maps, beyond casualty charts, into the years that follow. Because the true cost of this attack is not measured in deaths alone, it is measured in what the world becomes afterward.
5 years later, the world map looks familiar, and yet nothing feels the same. The United States is still intact, its borders unchanged, its flag still flies over Washington. But beneath the surface, the country has hardened permanently. Southern California never fully recovers. Large sections of San Diego remain restricted zones, officially decontaminated, unofficially abandoned. Concrete foundations sit empty. Entire neighborhoods exist only in aerial photographs and sealed records. The ports reopen slowly, under constant inspection, guarded by protocols written in blood. Public health becomes national security. Every major American city now maintains permanent quarantine infrastructure. Medical surveillance is normalized. Identification papers track vaccination status. Travel requires clearance. What began as emergency powers never fully recedes. The pivot character's absence is felt here. Commander Hale lives quietly in the Midwest, teaching public health at a small university under a non-disclosure agreement. His warnings about moral erosion go unpublished. His students sense the weight he carries, but never learn why. Globally, the shock reshapes alliances. The newly formed United Nations prioritizes biological weapons control, not as an abstract fear, but as a lived catastrophe. Treaties are drafted earlier, stricter, and enforced with unprecedented inspections. Compliance is uneven. Distrust is universal. Japan's post-war fate is darker. The revelation of Operation Cherry Blossoms, leaked years later by declassified intelligence, destroys any narrative of victimhood. Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain tragedies, but they now share space with a quieter horror. International sympathy evaporates. Japan is demilitarized more aggressively. Scientific institutions are purged. Unit 731 becomes public knowledge far earlier, its crimes displayed in museums rather than buried in archives. China uses the moment. Its long-suppressed suffering under biological warfare is finally acknowledged. Reparations are demanded and partially granted. The balance of moral authority in Asia shifts permanently. Technology follows fear. Early warning systems are built not for missiles, but for microbes. Air sampling stations line coastlines. Cities install biodetection sensors alongside fire alarms. The Cold War begins not with nuclear brinkmanship, but with invisible threats. The Soviet Union accelerates its own programs. So does Britain. So does France. Each claims defensive intent. None fully believe the others. Civil society adapts and fractures. Masks become commonplace years before they otherwise would have. Public gatherings shrink. Trust in crowds erodes. The shared post-war optimism that defined the real timeline never materializes. Children grow up learning plague drills alongside fire drills. This is the world the attack creates. Not ash, not ruin, but suspicion. And this is only the surface, because beneath it lies a more profound transformation, one that changes how humanity understands war itself. That shift comes into focus next. The deeper change is psychological. War is no longer imagined as something that arrives with sirens or declarations. It is no longer something that soldiers fight while civilians wait. After San Diego, war is understood as something that can begin quietly, on a warm night, carried by the wind, felt first as a cough. This realization reshapes doctrine everywhere. Military academies rewrite their curricula. Strategy now includes epidemiology. Commanders study population density charts alongside terrain maps. Victory is redefined, not by territory taken, but by outbreaks prevented. Deterrence mutates. Nuclear weapons still exist, but they lose their monopoly on fear. Biological weapons become the ultimate taboo precisely because they worked. They did not destroy cities, they hollowed them out. They turned neighbors into threats and governments into wardens. Every major power secretly maintains a capability it publicly condemns. The arms race goes underground. In the United States, federal authority remains expanded. Intelligence agencies gain permanent mandates to monitor scientific research, foreign laboratories, even academic exchanges. Universities become partially classified spaces. Knowledge itself is regulated. The press never fully recovers its independence. The justification is always the same: panic kills. For survivors, memory becomes fragmented. There are no national memorials for the plague dead. Too many questions, too much shame. The victims are remembered locally, quietly, names etched into plaques that avoid mentioning cause. San Diego becomes a warning whispered in policy circles, not a story told to children. Commander Hale watches this world with a mixture of relief and regret. The disease never returns at the same scale. The defenses work, the systems hold. But the cost is trust. He understands now that history did not break at the moment the fleas were released. It broke when the world learned that restraint had failed, that someone, somewhere, had decided that civilian death was an acceptable instrument. That lesson cannot be unlearned. By the mid-1950s, the planet is safer from invasion than ever before, and more afraid of itself than at any point in history. Borders are intact, cities stand, governments endure. But humanity has crossed into a quieter, colder era, one where peace is measured not by silence, but by absence of symptoms. And hovering over it all is a single, unanswerable truth. This world exists because history bent by days, by delays, by one submarine that did not receive a message in time. The camera lingers on the Pacific once more, calm, indifferent, because the ocean remembers nothing. The final question remains. What saved the real world was not virtue. It was timing, and timing can always fail.
History likes clean endings. Treaties signed, flags lowered, wars concluded on paper. But this story leaves no such comfort. What happened here did not require genius or overwhelming force. It required patience, planning, and a willingness to target life itself. The most unsettling truth is how little had to change for this nightmare to unfold. No dramatic betrayal, no miraculous technology, just a delayed order and a commander who chose to continue. Operation Cherry Blossoms forces a reckoning with how fragile restraint truly is. The real Second World War ended without this attack, not because humanity rejected the weapon, but because the calendar ran out. Days mattered, hours mattered. History survived on timing alone. That should trouble us, because it means the boundary between the world we know and the one you just witnessed is thinner than we like to believe. It is not guarded by morality.
It is guarded by systems, communication, and people who choose not to act when they still can. The plague never came to California in our timeline, but the plans existed, the weapons were real, and the temptation was there. So the question lingers, one that history never answers for us. If Japan had struck first with disease, would the United States have responded in kind? Or would that line have held? If this story unsettled you, it should, because understanding how close we came is the only way to recognize how easily it could happen again. If you want more deeply researched, cinematic explorations of history's near misses and dark alternatives, subscribe to the channel. History doesn't repeat itself.